No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode number 114. Please click to subscribe to our brand new independent news source. Turn on the notification bell. Remember, alerted to all our live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Breaking right now, ISIS bride Shamima Begum is making a fresh bid to return to the UK using the fall of Assad in Syria as her latest excuse to return to the country she betrayed by joining the Britain-hating Jihadists. And she's not the only one, with growing fears that a flood of ISIS defectors will find a way back to the UK. And do you really think we can trust this man to protect our borders?
By the Home Secretary was the wrong decision, and I think it was a rushed decision. And I think it left out of account the interests of the newly born child who's tragically died.
Yep, two-tier care wanted Begum back. The brilliant Godfrey Bloom joins me live to discuss shortly. Also coming up on the show today, Billionaire Nick Candy becomes the latest Tory defector to reform UK as Nigel Farage responds to rumours that Suella Braverman will be next. A sham report slams GB News for reporting on Muslim issues, which has been promoted by the BBC's supposedly impartial news presenter and speaking feed cheat Clive Myrie. And J.K. Rowling turns down a Damehood as she continues her furious defence of women with a brilliant comeback to India Willoughby. I'll show you. Then in the uncancelled after show, Harry and Meghan's polo is released. I've watched it so you don't have to and can confidently tell you it is the worst series in Netflix history. I'll reveal why, and then our royal mastermind and Harry's biographer Angela Levin reveals her verdict, which I'm pretty sure is going to be scathing. And remember, the uncancelled after show now broadcast exclusively daily and on demand on Substack, which you can Google or get to right now by visiting www.outspoken.live. Please subscribe to a monthly paid membership for access to the after show, my exclusive reporting and columns, access to our live chats on the Substack app, and the chance to join a thriving community. Most importantly, it is a safe space, free of censorship. That really matters these days, and your support from just £5 a month plus VAT gives you that 30 minutes of extra content after the main show every weekday. But more importantly, allows me to continue staying independent. It is completely possible, though, to subscribe for free, and I would love you to do that. www.outspoken.live. But now, let's go. Sometimes a meme speaks so much truth, right? We all knew that slippery Starmer's election as a socialist accidental Prime Minister of our United Kingdom would herald the moment our enemies were allowed back in. Indeed, I'll never forget that when Starmer was honest about his feelings, he argued that one of Britain's biggest traitors should be welcomed back with open arms.
By the Home Secretary was the wrong decision, and I think it was a rushed decision. And I think it left out of account the interests of the newly born child who's tragically died. Had the interests of the child been taken properly into account, I think we would see that this was a wrong decision and a rushed decision by the Home Secretary. Well, he's got Ken did a lot of cases, as I did, under the Terrorism Act. He knows exactly what can be done back here. I think what he says is right. I think actually the Home Secretary needs to come to Parliament tomorrow, make a statement on this and face questions. I think that's the right thing to do in the circumstances as they now are, because I think there is a growing feeling that this decision wasn't properly made.
He only changed his mind once he realised that campaigning on a position of welcoming Shamima back to Starmer's Britain was unpalatable.
In 2019, you said stripping her of her British citizenship was the wrong decision. She's lost her appeal to regain it. Should she be allowed to appeal again? Should she be allowed back here in order to face justice in the UK?
I think the court decision yesterday is the right decision.
But now he's in power, we know that Starmer's word is meaningless, so it's time to get very worried. Begum's lawyer, Tasnimi Akanji, has told the Daily Telegraph today that the hopes of her returning to the UK are bolstered by the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Watch this space, he boasted to the newspaper. Aged 25 and regretting her decision to flee the UK to join the Manchester Arena concert bombers of Islamic State now that she's languishing in a camp in northeastern Syria where all three of her godforsaken poor young babies died, Shamima has transformed into a Western-looking woman. But I know from my own conversations with those who have got close to Shamima, as close as you can to a woman like that it's all a sham designed to trick us. This is the real Shamima, unrepentant and arrogant.
Allowed to come home or not? You know that, do you? Okay. What are your feelings about that?
I think a lot of people should have like sympathy towards me for everything I've been through. You know, when I didn't know what I was getting into when I left, and I just was hoping that maybe for the sake of me and my child, they let me come back.
Okay.
Because I can't live in this camp forever. It's not really possible.
But here's how stateless Shamima's plan works. Claim that the closure of the Roj detention camp following Assad's overthrow puts her life in danger, allowing her to make a fresh appeal under human rights laws. But unbelievably, Begum will soon not be our biggest problem out of the new Syria, with fears that 20 British jihadists and 20 jihadi brides, as well as their 40 children, could soon be on the way back to the UK. The bleeding hearts Starmer looks to are already calling for just that. Dan Dolan, the Deputy Executive Director of human rights charity Reprieve, said today it is more urgent than ever to repatriate the British families imprisoned without charge in northeast Syria. These are not innocent British families, for God's sake. Mummy and Daddy wanted to destroy us, to literally blow us up. And with our security at threat more than ever before, I've never felt more despondent to have Starmer in number 10. A man who cares more about jailing patriots who sent an impertinent post on X or Facebook after the Southport massacre than protecting our borders from known enemies who have already betrayed us. But now, the uncancelled interview. And today, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by the financial economist, defence expert, author, political commentator, former MEP for UKIP, and now, believe it or not, YouTuber. He's doing brilliant stuff online, Godfrey Bloom. Godfrey, so great to have you here. You're obviously a defence expert. How worried should we be that all of these jihadists might use the fall of Assad in Syria to engineer a return to our shores?
Well, I'm worried, but I don't know that I've... by the way, thanks for inviting me, Dan, I should say, to be polite.
Great to have you.
Thank you very much indeed. But I was worried up to now because we know that they're pouring into the country anyway. And they were pouring into the country under the last government. We don't know who they are, how many of them are jihadists. They come in boats, we don't have a clue, and they're being spread around the country in hotels. And some of them have been quite upfront about how they hate this country's system, and they are religious zealots. But then we mustn't be surprised when we look at Keir Starmer, who has really hated this country all his life. So we have a prime minister who hates his country. And I sometimes wonder how these people climb the greasy pole of politics. It's quite clear that this government don't like this country or its institutions or its people. And the last one wasn't that much better, let's be brutally frank. If you look at the immigration statistics under Sunak and his predecessors, it seems to me that nobody likes this country who is in politics. So you find if you are an old-fashioned an old-fashioned patriot, and I use that word because I am one. It's pretty obvious I am one. It seems to me that that's passed out of fashion in our political life, and I think that's a great shame.
But Godfrey, it's more than a great shame, isn't it? It's chilling, it's terrifying, it's sinister. Starmer hasn't even tried to hide it. He said that he preferred Davos to Westminster.
I picked up on that as soon as he said it. And of course, that was an interview with Emily No-Mates. And it
I love that.
And nobody picked up on it as quickly as they should. And of course, the second question from good old Emily, don't we love the BBC? It should have been, well, why are you striving so hard to get into Parliament when you obviously don't give a shit about it? You think it's all here in Davos. Why would people give you their support in order to get into their Parliament, which is hundreds and hundreds of years old? And it's the linchpin of our democratic society. That question wasn't asked. And neither you nor I, nor most of the watchers of your channel will be surprised at that.
I know. It's truly worrying. It's truly worrying. Do you have any hope, Godfrey, that Trump and Trump's election might shift the Overton window a bit, might change the geopolitical outlook?
I'm not too sure. I'm not comfortable with his lineup. He's got some good people. Trump has brought some good people on board, and that's interesting as well. But as when it comes to the, if you will, pro-war Washington neocons, I don't think he's cleaned out the stables properly yet by this alignment. I was hoping he would be a little bit more radical.
Yeah. I mean, he's certainly been more radical than 2016. But not enough, you think?
You can't always, what he says and what he actually then does aren't always the same thing. Sometimes he says good things and does bad things, and sometimes he says bad things and does good things, and we're not going to know until he's in power. But of course, this is true of democratic politics. We've seen that in Italy, haven't we? Where the Prime Minister there came in talking a very good story, and then abandoned all her positions. So we saw that in Italy. We've seen it in this country when we saw a firm hand on immigration from the Conservative Party, who did exactly the opposite. It seems to me, what I don't understand, it's a failing, I think, in representative democracies, that people can say what they like to get elected, and then when they're elected, they can go back on it. I tell you what I'd like to see, Dan. I would like to see a political party manifesto set in law. So there would be a legal position if they stood on one thing, if they stood on one policy or a series of policies, and they then abandoned them within almost months, that they would then be legally liable, as in contract law. I don't actually believe that you need new law, just contract law under the law of the land, under common law and statute law and commercial law. So really now, of course, the country should be suing the socks off Starmer, taking his house, and we should take his car, and we should take his natty suits, and we should do the same to predecessors. I'd like to root out the Conservatives who did the same thing. So, yeah, there are things that we can do. It seems to me that we don't do them. One of the big problems we have, and nobody knows better than you, Dan, is that we do not have a free press. We no longer have a free press. The newspapers are all run by the same people. They're edited by the same people. And television is run by the same people. So there's no voice. And of course, most political views in the country, if you say, and arguably you might argue, 80% of people in this country believe whatever propaganda is pushed down their throat. They watch the BBC, they watch Sky TV, they only pay half attention, they don't really listen to anything. Most don't engage with politics at all. That's particularly true in local government, but it's also true of elections. That was a pitiful turnout, the worst since 1926, I think it was. So people don't engage in politics, which is why the Mayor of London keeps on getting returned, only 30% turnout. So really, these people bring it on themselves. But I must say one thing in their defense, because I have been one by and by. If you believe none of the above, if you believe every damn jack of them as scoundrels, you don't vote for the least worst. Stay at home. And that's what I've done. And I have been advocating for many years there should be a formal counted box, not a spoilt vote, none of the above. It should be at the top of the thing, none, or at the bottom of the thing, none of the above, and you can put your cross by it. And I can tell you what, and I'm sure you and your viewers would agree to this, you would find the massive majority of people put a cross by none of the above.
It would become the biggest movement in British political history, I'm sure. Godfrey, we've got the live poll running on the live chat on YouTube. I just want to bring you the results. I'm asking today, what punishment does Shamima Begum deserve? I think you'll find the results fascinating, Godfrey. No one wants her back. Just 3% of our viewers saying a limited jail sentence in the UK. 5% saying a life jail sentence in the UK. 17% saying the death penalty, but 76% of Outspoken viewers saying stay in Syria forever. Do you understand that position?
Yes, I do. I don't know why she would come. The first thing she does when she gets here, if she's brought back, is get on welfare and suck at my taxes and everybody else's taxes. She made her bed. She must lie in it. She must stay where she is. More fool her. I'm fed up with all these people. No, sorry. You stay where you are, sweetheart.
Amen. Amen. Breaking right now, a major coup for Nigel Farage's Reform UK, with another senior defection from the Conservative Party. This time, it's the billionaire Nick Candy, who has pledged to give Farage's outfit a 7-figure sum, but more importantly, raise tens of millions of pounds. Nigel Farage spoke about this for the first time earlier today to his employer, GB Newswatch.
You'll sort of got the professional in maybe to do it.
There's no pressure on him. He's doing it because he wants. But you heard him earlier.
Yeah.
You know, he's got 2 young daughters. He's worried about the future of this country. I bet you watching live now, there are people of all ages really scared that we're in societal decline, that we're led by people who seem to accept this sort of gentle downward spiral. We're much more optimistic than that. We genuinely believe we can turn this around.
Nigel was also asked about the growing rumours that the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is going to defect to the party following her husband, Rail Braverman.
Oh, the one who does all the gossip. You know.
Her partner's come across.
Her husband joined at the weekend and within 24 hours was out leafleting and knocking on doors. Incredible. And he texted me and said, at last, something I can believe in again. As for what Suella's going to do, I don't know.
Are you talking to her?
No, I haven't done, actually. I haven't spoken to her since the election.
But other Tory MPs might come across?
I don't know.
Nick Candy explained his decision too.
It's just a disaster. The country is in decline.
It's a Tory failure. Labour trying to get it right.
Labour have got it so wrong already. You can't tax your way out of this problem. Okay, you have to grow the economy. Okay, and I'm not a politician. I don't want to be a politician. But what I can do is I'm very good at raising monies for funds for businesses. I'm very good at helping operations of businesses. And I will make sure that Reform UK has the right funds to run their operations and businesses correctly.
You say you can raise enough funds to make them win the next general election. Nigel Farage, to my right, will become Prime Minister. How much do you think you can raise?
I think for past general elections, sort of 25 to 40 million pounds has been raised for previous parties, and I think I will do significantly better than that.
More than 40 million?
Yes.
Wow. And
already this morning, I've had millions of pounds worth of donations from people that have never donated to a political party in this country.
And Elon Musk reacted to the news. He's getting engaged in UK politics, folks, with one word: interesting, although he did later have a conversation with Nigel again, all publicly, all for us to see. That's the democracy of X, asking when he would have the opportunity to go to the polls. And of course, it is the local elections next year. So Godfrey Bloom, I'm fascinated about this. You obviously worked with Nigel Farage for many, many years. Is he our next PM?
Well, I don't know. There's a long way to go, isn't there, if Keir Starmer stays the course, which I rather doubt that he will. The thing is, what we've got to bear in mind, two things we have to bear in mind. First of all, the Democrats recently in the American election had twice as much money to spend as the Republicans. It didn't change the result. So we mustn't assume that lots and lots of money is going to change a democratic result at some stage in the future. That's point one. It doesn't work like that. I'm
Good
glad
point.
it doesn't work like that. It'd be terrible if it did work like that. We've also got to bear in mind, for those of us who remember, I was not quite a founder member of UKIP, but I was pretty close to a founder member. And it was a grassroots movement and very popular. And the country was screaming out on that one subject, which was Brexit. They were screaming out. And when I started on my campaign there in the late 1980s, it really was no hope. It was no hope. There was no hope of UKIP ever getting anywhere, really. It was a patriotic duty for me and many other grassroots members of UKIP.
And you did it.
Then it got more and more popular. The votes went up. And when it got to 2009, we were on the threshold around about 2009, which was a platform which was broadly squandered, I'm afraid, politically. And then it went on to 2014. And the same thing happened again. And I did an interview with Andrew Neil in 2014, 1 year before the election, and he asked me what the chances were. And I said, the problem is UKIP and minor parties, smaller parties, do not understand something that's fairly fundamental. Voting as a pressure group and venting your spleen is one thing, which we see at by-elections sometimes, and we see them at other elections, at local elections. When it comes to Westminster, people want to see a team. You have to produce a team. You have to have a shadow health secretary or spokesman. You have to have a shadow defence. You have to have a shadow chancellor of the exchequer. Because people are, we don't have a presidential system, whatever some of these people might think. You have to vote for a team. And this is where they fall down. And the thing that makes me slightly disappointed was that wasn't recognised with UKIP in 2014-15, and they got no seats. And I knew they wouldn't, and I told Andrew Neil they wouldn't, because they wouldn't have a team approach. Then we had Brexit, and that sort of disappeared, and the reasons I don't want to go into that because I don't know too much about it, because I was out of the game by then. So now we have Reform, which is a grassroots party, and that's good, and that fills everybody with hope. It's inspirational. But then, of course, what's the first thing that happens is we can't make, they say that leadership there and say, oh, we've got to professionalize it. No, that's exactly what we rejected. We don't want professional politicians. We want a grassroots system to go for representative democracy in the House and Parliament, but with a team with some experience in what they are representing. Not necessarily that they're an MP or they're an elected councillor for Reform or anything else. In UKIP, we gave up the chance of having a spokesman for national health who was a young, articulate surgeon in Edinburgh. But we didn't put him there as a spokesman because he wasn't an elected MEP, so we put a doorstop in instead of him. We found we had recently retired Royal Naval captains who could have been our defence spokesman as well. But we didn't use them for the same reason. So what we've got to do, and let me get this clear, I recommended on my channel, I've got about 250,000 followers on various channels, as you probably know, and I, relatively last minute, within 2 weeks of the election, I said, no, it looks like Reform's the only game in town. It's the only game in town. You've got to vote Reform. And they got 4 million votes, which is round about what UKIP got. And of course, it was more than the Lib Dems got. But we all know how the political system works. I'm not sure that these lessons have been learnt from the UKIP and Brexit days. And when I saw the departure of Ben Habib, who is an intellectual heavyweight and very articulate, and Butterfingers fringe party Reform, as they are at the moment, and they could get bigger and bigger, and I hope they do. You can't afford to lose people like Ben Habib. You just can't, especially if you're trying to build a team for a major election. He would have made an excellent shadow minister without perhaps portfolio even or whatever. He was a very good man. You can't lose people like this.
The handling of that was so botched, I think. Then the other factor is the reference to the marchers who went to the Uniting the Kingdom rally are described as Tommy Robinson supporters as that lot, which has also upset a lot of people. Godfrey, how do you feel about that?
Yes, indeed. I'm up here. I have a small holding in the East Riding of Yorkshire, and I was having a Sunday lunch, funnily, the Sunday following that, and a number of people around my dinner table were at that march with their families, waving a Union Jack. Now, in my view, Tice is somehow politically retarded. The last thing you do is to slag off people who voted reform, and I would suggest 70% of those people there voted reform, and 70% of the people there would have delivered leaflets for reform or sent money to reform. And he gratuitously slagged them off. What was his game? Sometimes I wonder whether these things are own goals or people have got a few quid in the toe cap of their football boot.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's playing the mainstream media game. And then the other question is, Godfrey, can you have too many Tory defections? Another one in the last couple of hours. Former Conservative MP Aidan Burley joined Reform UK at our Christmas lunch today. Now, Nigel says death by 1,000 defections, but actually, don't you just want the morally pure Conservative superstars? I mean, I would take a Suella Braverman in a second because I think she could immediately become their shadow Home Secretary, for example.
You've put your finger absolutely on it, Dan. You're absolutely right. And this is where UKIP went wrong. We threw over a blanket invitation. It was a Charlie Charlie call, as we used to say in the army, a Charlie Charlie call, an invitation to everybody. Conservatives, come and join us. Now, that was interesting for me because most people up here, hundreds of thousands of people who voted for me representing UKIP, were old Labour. They were old Labour. Picture of Queen on the wall. Picture of the Queen on the wall. Now, these people, if they wanted to have any credibility, should have come across to Reform before the election, not after, because all they're trying to do is to save their political seat with somebody. So I'll stick Reform on my forehead this time. I'll stick Reform on. I might get a chance of a political appointment. It's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. What we should be doing, and I say we because I voted Reform last time, what we should do is for these people to say, bugger off.
Yeah.
Bugger off. We don't want you. You're one of the people who dug the hole and put this country in the bloody hole it's in now.
Would you know what? I'm going to show you something that I think you will absolutely love, Godfrey. Not sure if you've seen it or not, but I found this absolutely brilliant. So it was brought to my attention by Stephen Edgington, who's the great American reporter for GB News. And he posted the New York Young Republicans snubbed Kemi Badenoch and the Tories from their famous annual gala because they don't want to host globalist losers. And I want to read out the statement from the Executive Secretary Vish Bura of the New York Young Republicans because I think it sums up what the Conservative Party did perfectly. It said, the gala is a party for winners, not globalist losers. MAGA Republicans are not interested in working with parties in the death throes of their moral integrity and electoral viability. And then the president of the Young Republicans, Gavin Wax, added, for a decade and a half, the UK Tories governed their nation to the left of the Democrats. It ended in record migration, legal and illegal, as well as virtually bankrupting the country and transforming it into something weak, unreliable and unrecognisable. Worse still, their fecklessness led to this even greater disaster of a Labour administration. They're a textbook case of how not to govern, and the idea they would get anywhere close to any MAGA power centres is risible. Isn't that brilliant? Isn't that the way to deal with it, Godfrey?
Could have written it myself.
Totally. So basically you're saying, no. If you're a globalist conservative, Reform should say, we don't want you. Rack off.
They don't want the patriots with Union Jacks parading in London. They don't want them. They don't want that lot. Well, let me say as a Reform voter, I don't want that lot. Their lot. Failed Conservative politicians, rats leaving a sinking ship, trying to get a billet somewhere else.
Something has changed.
Don't want them.
Yeah, something is changing though, isn't it? Matt Goodwin wrote a really interesting Substack today, Godfrey, about this. And he suggests that 2024 will go down as a moment in which anti-establishment was suddenly in while establishment was out, when the new anti-establishment media ecosystem, symbolized by viral YouTube shows like ours, podcasts and Substacks, came of age, while legacy media institutions continued their slow, inevitable decline. When openly rebellious counter-elites looked cool, what young person wouldn't want to be in the Trump, Musk, Vance, Kennedy, White gang? while traditional elites and the old celebrity class looked naff, out of touch and uninfluential, and a moment when the move fast and break things ethos of disruptors in Silicon Valley permeated politics from the advent of Doge to the populist spirit in Europe. And I think Matt Goodwin sums it up perfectly there, but I guess your point would be that's why you have to be careful not to allow non-true believers who are just trying to save their political skin to join the movement.
Yes, and I think when you're talking about deep state and you're talking about the establishment, I'm not altogether sure that we use the word controlled opposition, don't we? Controlled opposition.
Oh, yes.
There's the whiff in parts of reform that are controlled opposition. I didn't hear a single reform member really going for the throat of Big Pharma, all right? Didn't hear it.
No.
And all the other major issues of the day, excluding immigration. But even then, if you really peel down and drill down on immigration and say, let's have a look at the bullet points, they're a little bit flaky still, aren't they? They're a little bit flaky.
So, for example, worried about mass deportations, not prepared to talk about the changing demography of the UK, that sort of thing. Is that what you mean?
Well, yes, there's that. And we have to admit that there is an illegal economic immigration crisis that we have. And what I would like to see is we will put in charge of the Ministry of Defence with plenipotentiary powers, in charge of the Navy, the Army, the Royal Marines, and everything. I would like to see, and we will tow them back. And what I don't want to hear is, oh, well, you know, international law can be very difficult, and what happens if the French don't accept them, so on and so forth. That's bullshit. If you put me in charge, I would tow them back. And the French would have to accept them because there would be no other alternative. They would land like they do on our shores. They'd land back on French shores. Yes. And if the French tried to interfere with it, I'm sorry to say this, you have to be tough. We have to take a tough line with the French. It wouldn't be the first time we've sunk French boats, all right? Nelson did it. It wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, but in fairness, I have heard Reform UK argue for exactly that approach. I have.
I think you hear it from the sort of Lee Anderson wing. Can I call it the Lee Anderson wing? Who,
the Rupert Lowe wing, course, yes.
He won a Labour seat. Initially, he won a Labour seat. He's old school, old Labour type of working class guy who I love. What I sometimes call the sergeant's mess. The sergeant's mess. Bags and bags of common sense and a tough egg. And he'd also be tough on handouts to teenagers and youngsters as well. He made that clear the other day on TV. He said, no, let mum and dad sort them out. I don't see why the taxpayer should pay these lazy buggers. No, he's my kind of guy. But that's what we need. Yeah. And I tell you, in the spirit of, is the Ernie Bevin, the greatest foreign secretary we ever had, who was Labour. He was Labour. Ernie Bevin, not Nye Bevin, who was a drip. Ernie Bevin, who was a tough guy. And my father was a fighter pilot in the war. And it was quite interesting. He said, he's the toughest foreign secretary we've ever had. And we need somebody like that. And I think Lee is that kind of guy, actually. I'd like to see a working class guy actually leading a believer, not the home counties set, well-heeled and all the rest of it with the silk ties and so on and so forth. Okay, admittedly, I am one myself, but I want a bruiser. It's time for some knuckles. It's time for some knuckles out there to tell it how it is. And they'll win the Labour vote as well. But you can't win the Labour vote if you're throwing open the door for a tired ginger group Tory party.
Well,
Tory
indeed,
light.
Because Lee Anderson would not have won if he'd stayed as a Conservative MP.
Exactly.
So even though obviously it was the Conservatives who ludicrously suspended him, actually that was the best decision for his political career. But look, Godfrey, stand by, because I want to talk now about this really, really shocking sham Muslim report, which has wrongly slammed GB News. And totally inappropriately, Clive Myrie, who has a reputation, of course, as being one of our greatest newsreaders, yeah, right, he's just a champagne socialist like the rest of them, taking tens of thousands of pounds to give speeches while propagating political viewpoints as a paid newsreader at the BBC. He was the one that actually promoted this today with a very, very clear political agenda. So I think he should be sacked for that. But this was his tweet. GB News broadcasts half of all UK stories about Muslims, analysis shows. Now, I immediately responded to Mr. Myrie saying, do you not understand that that is actually an indictment of you, the British bashing corporation? You have spent more time nasal gazing over Greg Wallace than you ever have reporting the grooming gang scandal or scourge of extreme Islam being taught to young Brits in their mosques. Shame. But let me take you through this Guardian report to give you a little bit of an idea of what they are trying to claim. So the Guardian writes, GB News accounted for half of all news broadcast coverage of Muslims over a 2-year period, much of it negative, according to new analysis. The findings demonstrate an excessive focus on Muslims bordering on an obsession. According to this report by the Centre for Media Monitoring, researchers allege the stories about Islam are overwhelmingly negative and fail to understand the diverse nature of Muslim communities in the UK. They said the coverage could fuel community tensions and contribute to civil unrest. And of course, the usual suspects are absolutely backing this 2-year analysis. But Godfrey Bloom, I think they've got this completely wrong. I think they've completely misunderstood that, in fact, all this shows is that GB News is reporting the real issues. And when I was there, I would talk all the time about the scourge of grooming gangs, Islam extremism, people like Shamima Begum. And actually, what you find, Godfrey, is that the mainstream media, as you've already pointed out today, a very dishonest legacy media in the UK, just want to ignore these issues. They pretend they're not happening. So much of the bias in the media, Godfrey, is about story selection and what they choose not to report.
You're absolutely right. Now, the whole concept of this is very much more complex, I suspect, than most people would imagine. So, for example, there are now more Muslims in the country than there are Welshmen in Wales. So we are dealing with an enormous number of people, and it's not just a question of cultures, it's different cultures, different attitudes, so on and so forth, that some of these religions have. Now, of course, some of them are different. So you have, for example, the Ahmadiyya Muslims, who are very integrationist, very businesslike, and quite big in my Euro constituency in the West Riding of Yorkshire. And I used to go to sometimes to some of their curry lunches, which were jolly good. And these are very integrationist, very nice, very balanced people. And there was lots of Maseratis and Aston Martins because they bought into the capitalist society. And one of them was actually murdered by other Muslims for putting up in his shop, you might remember a few years ago, of putting in his shop window, "Happy Christmas to all my customers." And he was murdered by other Muslims. So what I think would be helpful to avoid this kind of critique, as it were, is to run, if I were running the channel, for example, I would say, let's have a broader look here. Let's look at what the Ahmadiyya Muslims say, the very successful community in parts of this country. So, you know, they're very integrationist. Let's have a look, because a lot of people are largely ignorant about these matters. Now, I know Sikhs aren't Muslims, so I'm not trying to say that, but we know how integrationist and welcome the Sikhs are. The Sikhs, and I have a regimental association with us as well, I must say. I must run my flag up the flag there. I'm very pro-Sikh because I think they've bought into our community and they have an excellent track record militarily with us and so on and so forth. So there is immigration which is good, and there is immigration which is bad. Now, that's something this country hasn't talked about at all. What is good immigration? What is welcome immigration? And what is not? And that needs to open up. And the other thing alongside that, if I may say, this sometimes gets me into hot water, but I'm used to hot water. Let's have a look at the unseen. You can see the Muslim thing. You can see the dynamic that we see with the BBC and media, so that we can see all that. But there's also another flip side to that, which is the unseen Zionist support within the media and banking and so on and so forth, and of course on the Hill in Washington, and a lot of which we don't see, so on and so forth. There's a whole can of worms here. There's a whole can of worms that need to be investigated, and I think it would do good for everybody on all channels. It's not going to happen with the BBC. It's never going to happen with the BBC to say, just a minute, let's have a lot more wider. Let's have a more wider approach to what the problems actually are, and how very often bringing lots of people in from a different cultural background who don't want to be assimilated are a threat to our culture and our way of life. And I think that would be a very much more constructive way of approaching these matters. That isn't a criticism of GB News. That's not a criticism. It's just saying I'd like to broaden the discussion.
Indeed, but this is now becoming mainstream, the sectarian politics in the UK. And I want to show you what I think most people, including myself, think is an extraordinary moment in the House of Commons this afternoon. So Iqbal Muhammad is the new independent MP for Dewsbury and Batley, but he's in this pro-Gaza grouping of independent MPs led by Jeremy Corbyn. And in Parliament today, he has argued against a law that would make it illegal for there to be marriages between first cousins. So let's have a watch along of this now. I think it's worth listening to.
Documented health risks with first cousin marriage. And I agree this is an issue, this is an issue that needs greater awareness on. Virginity testing, forced marriages, and the freedom of women must be forced marriage must be prevented, and the freedom of women must be protected at all times. However, the way to redress this is not to empower the state to ban adults from marrying each other, not least because I don't think it would be effective or enforceable. Instead, the matter needs to be approached as a health awareness issue and a cultural issue where women are being forced against their will to undergo marriage. In doing so, it is important to recognise for many people this is a highly sensitive issue, and in discussing it, we should try to step into the shoes of those who perhaps are not from the same culture as ours, to better understand why the practice continues to be so widespread. An estimated 35 to 50% of all sub-Saharan African populations either prefer or accept cousin marriages, and it is extremely common in the Middle East and in South Asia.
And it may well be Godfrey Bloom, but it's completely unhealthy from a medical point of view, but it goes totally against our culture. And isn't that the point?
That is indeed the point, but there is a reason for it being against our culture. There is a reason for all this, and that is, you're quite right, and you hit upon it first time. That's the health aspect. And if you go to parts of West Yorkshire, and I suspect other bits I don't know so well, where these practices predominate, I think you'll find that you can tell immediately, who is the child of such a marriage. They are very small, very weak, probably hunchbacked, so on and so forth. And you can spot them a mile away. It's not 100%, of course it's not, but it's very close. It's very close to some form of physical deformity, that close. There's a reason. But you've got to understand, and this is something that people don't understand, it gets me into trouble again. This branch of Islam, if you will, is 700, came to the fore, as it were, around about 700 AD. When Christianity came to the fore, of course, in 100 or 200 AD. So as far as cultural matters are concerned, it's a young religion. It's still quite a young religion. People forget that. And if you go back to Christianity in the Middle Ages, we were making a lot of these mistakes as well. So the point is, they don't seem to want to learn from the mistakes we made when we were doing the same things in the Middle Ages. But certainly, I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to say marriage, that kind of marriage, is not welcome and not right in this country, especially, Dan, when we have a welfare state and an NHS. To deliberately breed people who are actually not quite well, through this practice, then it falls on your neighbour to actually subsidise these things. And I think we need a much more broader outlook. We're not saying, just a minute, you can't do this, but you also, this guy, I've forgotten his name, he can't hide behind the fact we've got a different culture, so we can do these things. Well, actually, anti-human. No, you can't get away with that. He might say, I'd like to crucify Christians because that's my religion.
Yeah, but the problem we've got is that Labour has created this situation by throwing open our borders. Now, yes, that was continued by the Conservative Party, but what Labour is now facing, Godfrey, is potential extinction because they're being challenged on the right from Reform UK, but challenged on the left by what I believe are extreme Islam candidates. So if you look at, for example, the results in Dewsbury and Batley at the last election, that was a Labour seat. Labour had someone running in the seat called Heather Iqbal. So by her name, you would assume that she was also a Muslim woman. But it wasn't even close. Godfrey, it wasn't even close. This guy, Iqbal Muhammad, got 15,641 votes. Heather Iqbal got 8,700 votes. Now, Reform UK was in third place. But my point is, Labour has to pay lip service to this extremism, doesn't it? Because otherwise they are facing electoral wipeout in key constituencies.
Yes, exactly. And of course, this game is played very well. So when I was having lunches and various things with different Muslim sects in my constituency in West Yorkshire, they played a very canny game. They're not stupid. So I would go to a lunch, maybe on Pakistan Day, for example, just to pick an example of that. And there would be Lib Dem councillors, Conservative councillors, and Labour councillors, all from the same family. They had a finger in every pie, and that's exactly what they do. And of course they wouldn't they? But that's also within their culture. It's also within the African culture, if you like. As soon as you get elected, what's the first thing you do? You put your brother-in-law in that job, and your mate in that job, and your wife in that job, and so it goes on. That is the name of the game. And of course, if you are a professional politician, which is most of the mainstream parties are, they have to play that game because they need to win that seat. There's a fundamental flaw, of course, which we haven't discussed yet, Dan, and it's a long discussion for another day probably. We have a flawed political system. Until we face the fact we have a representative democracy has failed, dismally failed. And we need to restore it. We need to look at the whole thing again and come up with a much better system. So we can't have these seats gerrymandered as we do.
No, indeed. And I would say the start of that would be a change to the electoral system. But yes, conversation for another day. Stand by, Godfrey, though, because we are continuing our conversation in just 1 minute with big news from J.K. Rowling. But first, you know how I often talk about the need for free speech to be protected, but I've increasingly been thinking of the need for personal protection online from snoopers, bad actors, and hackers. And I'm delighted to tell you I have found the fail-safe solution. But what's more, this VPN is also a life changer when it comes to providing you entertainment and information from anywhere in the world, wherever you are. So let me introduce you to Surfshark. This has changed my life. Actually, it is an incredible and easy to use service that encrypts all your internet traffic, meaning your online activity stays safe so you can shop, stream, browse, and conduct your banking online in complete privacy as if you're in any country. But the benefits of Surfshark actually go beyond keeping you safe. This is an entertainment tool. You can access all your favorite channels or news shows or news channels from anywhere in the world, wherever you are, including, by the way, the big streaming services. So Hulu, iPlayer, HBO Max, Peacock, Amazon Prime, the different regional variations of Netflix and Disney Plus. Within seconds, you're watching as if you're in another country. For sport, it's amazing as well. If you're away, but the rights are only available to be watched by people in the UK, you just change your location. And this is an insurance policy too, because there is creeping censorship in lots of countries. I always point to the fact that France, if you're in France now, you can't watch Rumble. So this gives you the opportunity to watch anything, anytime, anywhere, true freedom. A VPN can also save you money because you can change your location for websites that alter their prices depending on where you are buying from, including airfares and sales and that sort of thing. But there are other benefits too. Surfshark gives you the option for unlimited devices, very helpful for me. I'm one of those annoying two-phone people, but also you can use it for your entire household too with just one subscription. There are over 3,200 servers in over 100 countries, meaning there's a world of choice at your fingertips, plus 24/7 customer service. Especially helpful if it is your first time using a VPN, and if it is, my goodness, you need one of these. So go to surfshark.com/outspoken for an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price. What's more, Surfshark's so confident that it's the best VPN in the world that you can give it a try for a full 30 days. And if you're not entirely satisfied, you will get your money back. So www.surfshark.com/outspoken for an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price, or you can just click on the link in the description box below. That's easier. But now, back to the show. And J.K. Rowling has revealed that she has turned down the opportunity for a damehood as her hero status continues for taking on trans extremists. So this revelation emerged because Lee Hood has started a petition. And petition's very popular at the moment, of course, and this petition was to make J.K. Rowling a dame. And in her very transparent fashion, J.K. replied, "I really, truly appreciate the sentiment. But in fact, I've already turned down both a damehood and a peerage. This is for entirely personal reasons. I've never wanted a title. Thank you, though." And Godfrey Bloom, given she has put so much on the line in order to stand up for women's rights and becoming the face of TERFs internationally, and by the way, TERFs are a term that the left like to throw out as some sort of insult, trans exclusionary radical feminist, but I actually view it as a great compliment. I love it that people say that I'm a TERF. I embrace it. So when I call J.K. Rowling a TERF, trust me, I mean it with genuine compliments. But I think, what a wonderful woman that she's one of these people who actually is just doing this because it's what she believes, and she's not looking for a damehood, and she's also turned down a peerage.
I entirely agree. I've got a lot of time for her because my friends, a lot of my friends whose opinion I trust, say that she brought a lot of children to reading. She brought a lot of children to reading it. Now, you might be amazed how few youngsters read these days. And I've got lots of friends who are youngsters, particularly, well, now they're getting into their early 30s. I'm an old geezer now, but you go into their houses, there's no books on shelves at all. So if she's done one thing and one thing only, she's brought reading back, the pleasure of reading a book back to children. And for that, she should be warmly applauded. She may also have, is it possible that she has another view, which isn't quite so overt, as it were, that she doesn't want to be associated with the sort of cretinous arseholes who now get honours? Do you suppose that could have anything to do with it?
Indeed. Indeed. So true.
I mean, does she want to be linked with Emma Thompson? I mean... Dear, oh dear. Wonderful actress, Emma Thompson. Absolutely.
I know.
What a big brain.
But Godfrey, why do they never learn? Why do they never learn? Just keep your mouth shut. We do not want to hear from actors, no matter how brilliant, or pop singers, no matter how much we love their tunes. And the American election shows that more than ever, where a whole load of celebrities have not just lost their reputation and lost the business of half of the country, but actually are humiliated, like Oprah Winfrey claiming this will be the last time you ever vote. I just feel like Democrats never learn, because do you remember in 2016, Hillary Clinton pulled out all of the celebrities too. So actually, I think with celebrities now, we don't just want them making banal political statements. J.K. Rowling, I think, is a real exception to that, because what she has done is put her entire career on the line. She didn't need to do any of this, but it was something she so passionately held.
I entirely agree. Of course, the funny thing with celebrities and actors and actresses in particular, which always makes me smile, they became famous and get paid vast amounts of money because they actually have to read and learn what other people have written for them. So your average, there are exceptions. The two I happen to know from personal experience are Edward Fox, for example, and Michael Caine, who actually have some original thought in their own head. But most of them just remember the lines they're supposed to remember. And then, of course, you can't trust anything they say, because if they try and write their own material, that's when you get these idiots. What's the guy in Star Trek? What's his bloody name? The bald guy. I can't remember his name anyway. You get all these sort of
Patrick
celebrities.
Stewart.
Yeah, but I mean, he's a complete prat. And I love, Star Trek's great, isn't it? But don't lecture me, please, old son.
Please.
Didn't he grab his knighthood? Emma Thompson grabbed her damehood. And they're more famous for slagging this country off than they are. I mean, they can't stop slagging the country, and then they pop up and grab whatever they can get.
Well, yeah, remember Dame Emma Thompson. Dame Emma Thompson was the woman who returned to an Extinction Rebellion protest on a first-class flight where she was spotted scoffing beef carpaccio. But look, I want to move on to JK's campaigning today, because she actually posted an article that said, how did transgender children in the US become so politicized? And JK replied saying, minors sterilized, healthy breasts cut off, teenaged girls, a total failure to address kids' mental health problems, and a major study suppressed because it didn't show what an ideologue doctor wanted it to. You're only upset because baddies brainwashed you. Now, this prompted India Willoughby, the trans newsreader, to reply saying, J.K. Rowling's tweets are disgusting and increasingly demented, but unless you're on Twitter, that's the bulk of the British public, you would have no idea what she's like. Still Mary Poppins, because Brit media don't report it unless, of course, it's someone reacting to her provocation. Then it becomes women's rights champion JKR was innocently wandering along Twitter Boulevard with her parasol last night when she was viciously pounced on by a gang of TRAs for no reason whatsoever. And JK replied, and yet again, she completely owned her, saying, calm down, India. For God's sake, you're acting as if I've jabbed you in the lady balls with my parasol. And that's the problem, isn't it, with taking on J.K. Rowling? She is so good with her words for very obvious reasons, Godfrey.
Yeah, well, she does words for a living. And she is, of course, incredibly wealthy. That is extremely helpful, because really it means she doesn't give a shit.
Yes.
She just doesn't care. And of course, I
Assuming
love people like that. Well, I would,
exactly.
wouldn't I? I would like people like that, wouldn't I?
Then there was also today, I don't know if you've seen it, but Pink News, which is this very hard left website which focuses on LGBT coverage. And the owner, who's a guy called Benjamin Cohen, and his husband have been exposed by a BBC investigation for a whole load of bad behaviour. And J.K. Rowling posted about this because, of course, Pink News has gone after her constantly. Pink News has come after me, actually, constantly as well. But J.K. Rowling posted, wasn't it Franklin Roosevelt who asked to be judged on the enemies he'd made? And it is interesting, isn't it, Godfrey? Because more and more and more, I do wonder if the age of woke is over, because we are seeing these cretinous creatures who run organizations like Pink News exposed for the hypocrites that we always knew they were.
I'm a libertarian, actually. I'm a long-term member of the Mises Institute in America, and I'm a libertarian. I used to lecture on libertarianism at some of the best universities, and I've written a book on it too. So I'm a libertarian. So I believe that whatever you do in the privacy of your own home, and that includes anything, it might include smoking pot, doing whatever you want to do in a free society, is nobody's business but your own. I don't know quite why people would actually try and mount a political platform. I mean, I happen to like, and we're all different, aren't we? I like blondes with big tits. But it doesn't mean to say I'm going to make a political statement about it, does it? We're all different. We all like something different. No, it's all nonsense, isn't it?
I couldn't agree more. I'm a libertarian as well. What my point is about these guys, I don't give a damn what they do in their own bedroom. But the fact is, they've run a website which for years and years and years has judged people like J.K. Rowling. So I guess they're getting a piece of their own medicine, would be my point.
I think you're absolutely right. But, you know, I think we've gone. I used to like. I'm a baby boomer, you know. We've although the laws have changed and the things have changed from a legislative perspective, but generally speaking, if it wasn't hurting you in the old days, you left it alone. You didn't bother. If it wasn't coming up Lime Grove, you left it alone because it's nobody's business. Whether I smoke, as long as I'm not blowing smoke into somebody's face. I don't smoke incidentally, but it's or I drink too much probably. It's nobody's business in a free society but your own. And what I find disappointing as I was born in 1949, decade by decade, I've seen every small piece of basic freedom, which a man of my age would regard as a basic freedom, be taken away. And I also don't know, excuse me, grasshoppering about, every single clip on YouTube when some sort of Hurtiwood police inquiry has 3 policemen. There are always 3 policemen. So it means that they say, oh, well, we've got 30,000 policemen or 50,000 policemen. You now have to divide it by 3 because they all go about together. None of them have shaved. None of them know what they're doing. None of them know how to put a uniform on. None of them know how to press their bloody trousers. Jesus Christ, how did we get here? How did we get to this? And I blame the Conservative government because they've been in power just as long as anybody else. And of course, the problem is fake conservatives. Fake conservative. You want to get into politics, you pretend you're a conservative, but you're not really, you're a socialist. The Conservative body is actually full of them and they get safe seats, like the Muppet near me at Malton. You know, he's
Who's
conservative. Can't remember his name. I should do, but,
but that
I can't.
says it all. That says it all, doesn't it? Godfrey Bloom. Yeah. Oh my goodness, absolutely. The decline of Western civilization. It is a concern. I really recommend people subscribe to Godfrey Bloom Official on YouTube. There's so much more of this from Godfrey, and it's been such a pleasure to have you on Outspoken today.
Thank you again, Dan, for inviting me. Most enjoyable.
And I'd love to have you back soon. Thank you so much, Godfrey Bloom. Brilliant guy. Now, coming up in the Uncancelled After Show, Angela Levin and I'm excited about this one. We're going to tear apart Harry and Meghan's brand new Netflix series, Polo. Don't worry, folks. You don't have to watch this piece of rubbish because I have spent 5 hours doing so today. And if I'm a little bit grumpy today, believe me, it's because I've had to spend 5 hours with this rubbish. But Angela Levin, she's done the same thing. We're up in just one moment. You know it's very important to me that we have a safe space for all the reasons actually that Godfrey was just talking about that isn't patrolled by big tech, where censorship and control run deep. So I've got my safe space on Substack, www.outspoken.live. You can sign up completely for free. I would love you to do that. I never know when I'm going to get cancelled from big tech. So it's really important that we have this direct relationship. And if you do subscribe on YouTube, if you do subscribe on Substack, I will always have that direct relationship with you because we can communicate there without the fear of cancellation. If you are able to pay for a monthly paid membership, which is £5 a month plus VAT, then you get that half an hour of extra content every day as well. So at this stage, we come off YouTube and Rumble, we move to Substack, and we continue our conversation in the Uncancelled After Show. www.outspoken.live is the address. Now, I'm back tomorrow, 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific with Father Calvin Robinson. Can't wait for that. Make sure you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and Rumble. Most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you, but I will see you on the after show in just one moment with Angela Levin.